So Matt Zarb Cousin is somebody who was in Jeremy Corbyn's office during his leadership of the Labour Party. Big lefty, big fan of mine, now a member of the Green Party as well as myself, who was a person who's spent a lot of time talking about the gambling industry in this country. I am very respectful of what Matt Zarb Cousin has done. He was recently on Times Radio having a discussion about Labour's move rightwards. Now, this should be peak memes chat. Because not only on this panel is friend of the show, friend of Israel, and fan of the Vietnam War, Luke Akehurst, part of the discussion, but the man who fears the nasty Ruskies under his bed, Paul Mason, is also on this panel as well. So it's like all of the memes in one place for us to be able to react to. So let's have a look, and let's have some fun watching Matt Zarb Cousin debate Luke Akehurst and Paul Mason about Labour shift rightward.
Part of the reason why the Labour membership is so overwhelmingly supportive of Keir Starmer is because those who are inclined to support him are leaving, or many of them are. So with that in mind, is Keir Starmer doing the right thing by moving away from the left? And are the left, if they want to influence the future direction of a Labour government, doing the right thing in leaving? Well, let's discuss.
Well, the main thing, of course, is that they have no influence within the party because all party democracy has been completely shat through the bed by the deliberate plan, essentially, to disempower the membership from the current leadership, who promised the opposite, explicitly opposite, more open and democratic Labour Party, and has done the opposite because he's a liar. He's a liar, he's a deceitful individual, and he should never have anyone's support who believes himself to be a progressive. Like, you just shouldn't do that.
Discuss this with three people who know more about this situation than most. Matt Zarb Cousin is a former spokesman for Jeremy Corbyn. Hi, Matt.
Hi, Patrick.
Luke Akehurst is a member of Labour's National Executive Committee and Secretary of Labour First. Hi, Luke. And Paul Mason is an author and journalist who helped Keir Starmer win the 2020 Labour leadership election. Hiya, Paul.
Great to be here.
Thanks very much for joining us, Paul. Matt, I'll start with you. As I said, you worked for Jeremy Corbyn. You worked for Labour MPs basically from the moment you left university too. So you've been around the Labour Party for a long time, but you're also one of the first people with a degree of public profile who had worked for Jeremy Corbyn to leave the Labour Party for the Greens in your case, as Laura Parker, who endorsed Keir Starmer in 2020, recently said she would vote for the Greens if she lived in Bristol. Owen Jones, of course, has quit the Labour Party and is working on a project to support left-wing Labour MPs, Green candidates, independent candidates to the left of Labour. But you were sort of a first mover, an early adopter of this theory. Why did you come to that decision, having worked for a left-wing Labour leader and having seen what the left could do, or rather what it couldn't do when it was in charge of the party?
Well, there's a couple of reasons. As well as working for Jeremy, I worked on Rebecca Long Bailey's leadership campaign, and during that campaign, it was extremely difficult to find any dividing lines on policy with Keir Starmer. He basically repeated everything that the Rebecca campaign stood on in terms of its platform, and has since reneged on basically all 10 pledges that he made in the course of that campaign in order to win over those that voted for Jeremy in previous leadership contests.
And those 10 pledges were renationalisation of utilities, taking a sort of tough line on foreign military intervention, rather, a tough line against it, requiring MPs to vote, all that sort of thing.
Patrick, it was even things like closing Yarl's Wood. I mean, that's how left-wing he was in that campaign, right? So closing detention centres, and the idea that he would actually stand on that platform now, he's a different politician to the one in 2020 that stood as Jeremy Corbyn's policies, but with a more professional, perhaps different type of delivery. That was the platform that he stood on, and that policy platform has a lot of popularity in the country across all demographics. And it wasn't the policy agenda that was the issue for Labour in 2019. It was Brexit and the fact that Jeremy, after years and years of sustained attacks, was a very unpopular leader at that particular time. It wasn't the policies. And unfortunately, what Starmer has done is he's deviated significantly from the agenda that he stood on, that he had a mandate for to be leader of the Labour Party. And frankly, I disagree with the previous caller because really it's not a surprise that Labour are miles ahead in the polls. We've had a pandemic, we've had several prime ministers, Tory prime ministers, we've had Liz Truss. It's been a disaster for the country, this last government, and it's not a surprise that the opposition is ahead. What I would caution against is that being a validation of the leader and of the platform that he's standing on, which
Well, I mean, at the end of the day, we know that it's not a validation of Keir Starmer because people don't like him. The public give him a minus 18-point approval rating. They also don't actually know what he stands for. Whenever you ask people to describe him, they overwhelmingly use either neutral or negative language. And the policies, the main ones people supported were the 28 billion pledge, which is now gone, and the workers' rights pledges that they're already cutting up. So he's not broadly supported. The fact that the intro to this conversation is, well, the membership overwhelmingly support him now, yeah, because literally everybody who didn't support him has all left the party, because they realised, as I said before, they have no influence over him now, because he lied to get elected by pretending to support things that he now obviously doesn't support, and then is using the authority that he's gotten through deception to then remove the political influence from everybody who voted for him for those policies. As simple as that. That's literally all that it is. And yeah, of course, because not only have people left the party because they've been expelled, as well as the fact that they've left of their own volition because they know they can't influence the current leadership at all, deliberately so. And so when it's very funny, the article from The Guardian that discussed these findings that 80% of the membership currently support Keir Starmer after 200,000 people left, they described it as a deliberate strategy to change the membership, which is a really great use of passive voice, really. If the Corbyn-era politicians were doing this at the top of the party, it would have been called a Stalinist purge. When the right wing of the party do, it's a strategy to change the membership, that's quite a euphemism they've got going on there.
It's pretty sparse as it stands. I think really the more that people take a look at Keir Starmer and the more that people take a look at Labour's offer or lack thereof, they're either not going to support them in the general election or they're going to be very, very disappointed if they do get into government. So from my perspective, from a left-wing perspective, and from the perspective of the country, I don't think it's a good thing for Labour to get a massive majority and therefore have a mandate to do whatever they like, because frankly, they could do anything. I mean, based on Starmer's track record of keeping promises, they could do anything in government. And at the moment, it looks like they're going to maintain the status quo. It looks like they're going to keep Tory economic policies to a large extent. And that's a disaster for the country. So in order to exert pressure on them, that has to be done external to the party. There's no channels, democratic channels within the party. Even selections now are stitched up for parliamentary selections. MPs are not decided by local constituency Labour parties. Well, if they are given a choice, it's from a short list of one. So frankly, the only way you can really exert pressure on this leadership is outside of the party. So that's why I think it's a good idea for people if they're left wing to leave.
Well, Luke Akehurst,
I mean, I've literally made this exact same point on my channel as well. Yeah, there is no democratic way of doing things. He talks about the selection for parliamentary candidates, where CLPs are basically given a Hobson's choice on who they're allowed to select. I refer you back to my Lauren Townsend comments I've made previously in the stream. And that is, of course, because they know that the future leadership of the party is predicated on getting a certain amount of support from the Parliamentary Labour Party. So they cannot, at any point ever, if they want to have dictatorial control over the party, or risk the inclusion of MPs that might lend support to a left-wing candidate in the future. They have to completely stamp that shit out. Otherwise, they fear a rerun of 2015 to 2019. That's what they fear. That's why they're controlling candidate selections. On top of that, they're also wanting to control candidate selections explicitly to ensure that they have a kind of unilateral support of Keir Starmer himself personally, to avoid the kind of conservative infighting we've seen from kind of factional warfare, by having a united group of people who never sway from the party line, from what the Starlet Politburo has mandated them that they have to support, in this kind of weird version of democratic centralism that isn't even democratic because it was predicated on lies. And so that's the main point. There is no internal democracy in the Labour Party, and we've seen it time and time and time again, to the point at which they're now being investigated for irregularities in the voting system used to select certain parliamentary candidates.
Me bring you in. You spent many, many years, I won't put too fine a point on it, organising in the Labour Party, basically to beat people like Matt's old cousin, who we've just heard from. From your perspective, you must listen to people like Matt saying they've given up on the democratic structure of the Labour Party, trying to bring the Labour Party to a more left-wing position, and think, that's fantastic, that's made your job easier. Is that right?
Well, it doesn't show much staying power, does it? I hung around throughout the Corbyn years because I had a vision of what I wanted the Labour Party to look like, a party that was connected to the values and the politics that the mainstream of the British electorate wanted, and I stayed.
That's not even true anymore. The mainstream of the British electorate want our utilities nationalised. In the electoral calculus, like MRP Megapol, the top most supported policy was nationalisation of our utilities. The top most supported policy. People don't want more private involvement in the NHS. They want our water companies nationalised.
You are a liar.
The supermajority of people in this country support the kind of nationalisation policies. They may have a different opinion on foreign policy, potentially. Obviously, of course, when you look at something like Gaza, actually all of our political class are in like a mega minority. There's a gigantic supermajority of people who wanted to see an immediate ceasefire, and that's been since November, by the way. This isn't a recent thing. So of course Labour have changed their position now to be calling for an immediate ceasefire and release of all hostages, like the SNP position of November last year. But the Labour Party is essentially completely pointless at this juncture, because they've spent so long essentially trying to pretend that they have their finger on public opinion to essentially make up policy on the go, rather than, I don't know, have any kind of morals or principles. Because we here on Left, we predicted exactly what was going to happen 6 months ago, and look where we are, and now we have the UN essentially saying we're in a critical position where 1 million people could die.
And I fought for that, and eventually I got a Labour Party that I was happy with, and these guys were here when everyone was singing "Oh, Jeremy Corbyn," and then the minute it's got tough, a lot of them have disappeared off to the Greens. I want a broad church Labour Party. I'm not personally hostile to people on the left. I've got a lot of friends who sit on the Corbynite left.
It's funny to watch him just kind of say those with a straight face. Well, the difference is between what happened for 2015 to 2019 and what's happening 2020 to now is that under Jeremy Corbyn, he was kind of fanatically devoted, almost to his own detriment, to this idea of internal party democracy. He let right-wingers have a deliberate seat at the table because he was obsessed with this idea of party unity, which at the time was a very magnanimous thing for him to do, which in retrospect looks very kind of naive and silly, when he should have just absolutely ejected people like this from the party, should have actually done the purges that they told us he was gonna do and then never did, and that they're now doing to us. Like, he should have purged these people, get rid of them. They're an absolute waste of space. They should join the Liberal Democrats if they want a centrist Liberal Party, which doesn't actually take the union involvement seriously. But that's why you guys were allowed to stay in the party, because he deliberately gave you a seat at the table. Where's our seat at the table in this broad church that you want to see? It doesn't exist. There's no internal party democracy. Nothing. And these people fought against it. Where's mandatory reselection when you wanted it? No, it's never there, is it? But now it's all just top-down selection. All of these things that we were told would happen under Jeremy Corbyn. And outside of like a couple of cases, which were done for a snap election where there is already provisions for the NEC to impose candidates. Whereas now we've had an entirety of a electoral cycle for Labour to select candidates. There's no special circumstances that are relevant as for the NEC imposing candidates. Now they're imposing candidates left, right and centre. Do you see what I mean? Like, this is why there's a difference here. With him saying, oh, well, you're not ready to tough it out then, are you? And yeah, because there's no path to doing it. Whereas you guys, you knew that there was a path already to do it because you were conspiring for 7 years to do it. Labour together explicitly existed to ensure that people like Luke Akehurst, who didn't leave the party, that the moderates had their own little safe haven for them to be able to plot in, taking money from private equity and capital investors to then have their own internal strategy as to what would happen when the Corbyn stuff was removed. Morgan McSweeney is on record in the New Statesman as saying that the only way Corbyn was ever going to get removed was by the electorate, and so they had to have a plan for when that happened. And what was their plan? It was to poll the membership, find out what they supported, which is broadly the same whether they were new members or old members, then tell Keir Starmer to run on that platform, and then immediately ditch it when he became the party leader. That was the whole plan, and it only was something that you could do because of the internal Labour Party democracy that Jeremy Corbyn supported and defended until he was removed from power. And then when you guys got hold of that system, got rid of it. That's why there's a difference.
Who I get on very well with on a personal level. The only people I want outside the Labour Party are people that are Leninists who don't belong in a democratic socialist or social democratic party, and people that are anti-Semitic or any other kind of racist who we need to expel. So I think it's actually, they're cutting off their noses to spite their face by leaving. I'm sat there going, oh well, I've got an NEC election that I've got to win this summer. people leaving the party who disagree with my politics and making it easier for me to get re-elected.
I want to bring Paul.
Also worth pointing out, this idea that there was just a bunch of Leninists in the party, this entryist stuff, we know that it's not true. And Labour together know that it's not true because they polled the membership to find that it wasn't true. And the most of the new membership, and of course the old guard, were very similar in demography. And they were mostly just progressive people who liked the European Union but absolutely despised austerity. That was it. Austerity was the really big monster here. There wasn't some secret sect of Trotskyist entryists trying to turn Labour into a communist party. That's just not a thing. It was never a thing, and Labour together knows it.
Mason in just a moment, Luke, but I just wanted to put what Matt's old cousin said about the sort of leadership of the Labour Party stitching stuff up to exclude the left, and it's not been a fair fight. What would you say to that? Because Matt was saying, and this is something you hear time and time again from people on the left of the Labour Party, that the leadership of the Labour Party and its allies in the National Executive Committee, yourself included, are stitching stuff up. It's not a fair fight. What do you say to that from Matt?
I think people have had to win very hard-fought selection contests would be surprised to hear that it was all done on shortlists of one, or they didn't. It was all stitched up for them. It's still extremely competitive. But I make no apology.
There were plenty of selections where people got entirety of the ward nominations. The Croydon councillor we might speak to in the future can elucidate further on this, where literally one person was selected in basically every single ward in the constituency, but because they were included in an email sent out by the head of the council about promoting this food bank that they'd been running, that was deemed to be outside of the electoral rules. They had to redo everything, and on top of that, that was also done with an honour voter as well. It's called these hard-fought selections when they had to fight tooth and nail for the top of the Labour Party to try and enforce candidates. I mean, just look at Rochdale, for example, where the CLP had to completely revolt and select somebody that wasn't even from their constituency just to try and stop infiltration by somebody who was a lobby journalist. Just shows you how rigged this stuff is. And again, you look at all the people who've been removed. Greg Marshall, Lauren Townsend, Maurice MacLeod, Lee Drennan. The list goes on and on and on and on and on. Like, Greg Marshall is one that you explicitly know was removed for factional reasons. He is so well supported within the party. When he came to the selection meeting in the CLP, they gave him a standing ovation when he came in. And again, they had to revolt and choose somebody who was a councillor from Lewisham because the candidate the top Labour Party wanted, Anna Joy Rickard, was so despised. Obviously, she moved on to some other constituency elsewhere because she's desperate for a 90k a year non-job. And that we selected somebody who was just a random councillor from Lewisham we'd nobody ever heard of. Like, that's the reason why all these talk about these tough selection processes is just complete nonsense at all.
For there being a degree of political judgment that goes into long listing that we do. First of all, we're doing due diligence and trying to make sure that we don't have incidents like what happened in Rochdale, where you get a candidate that lets us down. Incidentally, you're not a candidate from the left that let us down in that instance.
And it was because you interfered too much. You interfered too much and it blew up in your stupid faces.
But also trying to make sure that we end up with a PLP who has supported the leadership. There's no point winning by 35 seats and then it turns out that there's 35 members of the campaign group who are going to persistently break the whip. That means that we haven't got a stable majority to govern. And if there was a hung parliament in that situation, how could you negotiate with other parties if you can't guarantee that all of your MPs are going to vote the right way? So I'm...
Have you considered, Luke, right? Just a tiny little one from me to you. Have you considered that people would be more inclined to support the leader within the PLP if he had literally stuck to any of the promises that had gotten him to the position that he's in? The members overwhelmingly supported the platform that he ran on in 2020 in the leadership election. Those same people are the ones selecting parliamentary candidates. If you have to lie to get elected as leader and then have to stitch up all the candidate selections to only have people who agree with the platform that you've then changed to after lying, then you're the one at fault here. You could have just had the policies people wanted that you ran on in 2020, and then all of the PLP would be full of people who also supported those policies because they're all elected by the same kind of membership based on demography, and no one would have any problems. But it just shows you how much interfering they have to do to manufacture a situation where the party has support of these right-wing policies. They have to get rid of all the members who disagree with it, like almost half the membership that they were in 2019. They have to lie to get elected and change their position, and then tell everybody who disagrees that the door is open, that they can leave, and then they have to stitch up all of the candidate selections too. Like, that's how much internal mechanics has to go into engineering this situation, and the fact that he can't even see it himself is really quite funny.
I do think it's something that we should exercise political judgment about. Are people actually going to be good, loyal Labour MPs? It's not about the views that they have. It's about whether they put their personal views to one side and vote with the party that got them elected.
Paul Mason, Tony Benn used to say Labour wasn't a socialist party. It was a party with socialists in it. Labour's always been at a broader ideological tradition than just socialism, but that's a whole other radio program. But you must be. Do you sometimes feel, listening to some of the people you served with on Keir Starmer's leadership campaign of the left, Laura Parker, saying, a vote for the Greens wasn't necessarily the craziest thing in the world. You had people like Simon Fletcher, another left-winger who worked on Keir Starmer's leadership campaign. He's not left the Labour Party, but he's been speaking about how working on Keir Starmer's leadership campaign was a dead end for the left. I mean, how do you feel about that? Where do you stand 4 years later as an influential left-winger who worked for Keir Starmer, and you've seen the political direction of his leadership tilt in a rather different direction?
Well, when I see the number 44% on a recent opinion poll, I feel very happy, because the reason I supported Keir Starmer wasn't particularly to do with the 10 pledges. It was to do with the kind of leader we needed to have, and the kind of political strategy we needed in order to claw things back. Because I don't believe 2019 was just about Brexit. It was about a party leadership that had lost touch with the way working class people think and speak and the stuff they worry about. And I knew that Keir could put us back where we are. See, the argument in 2019, 2020 was we need 10 years out of power. We need to become a kind of liberal party. And that's what some of the kind of old supporters of Tony Blair were saying. Now, I said, and I think Keir said this, we can turn it around in 5 years if we do economic radicalism and a traditional Labour offer on things like defence, security, immigration, crime. And that's what Labour's 5 missions are all about. The
thing is, what's crazy is I don't necessarily think that he's too far off the mark with what he's saying in an abstraction. A move towards kind of more tough on crime logic, being a little bit less permissive of immigration. These are all things that are broadly more in tune with large swathes of society. And in fact, when it comes to things like defence, when it comes to things like tough on crime, Labour has actually historically been pretty in sync with the public on these things. Even during the Jeremy Corbyn era in 2017, they ran explicitly on massively increasing the number of police officers that were being recruited, because they'd been cut by the Conservative government under austerity. This is part of the anti-austerity pledge. People bought into this. People bought into the idea of Jeremy Corbyn saying, well, actually, we don't want the EU flooding our labour market with new workers to undercut British workers. Even though that's not how labour markets work, people were still in tune with that because it kind of scratched the itch of the anti-immigration types in 2017. The idea that Labour as a political platform had kind of moved away from that under Corbyn just isn't actually true. It may not be my personal politics, but he would be right to say that this economic radicalism plus this kind of more kind of authoritarian style leadership, I don't think is necessarily wrong. The problem is that there is no economic radicalism. It's just not there. He's living in a fantasy world. And also to try and say that, well, Keir Starmer is much more in touch with how working class people think. He can't even define working class. Literally asked by Nick Ferrari, what does working class mean? He could not give you an answer. He couldn't give you an answer other than, oh, well, they're people who have aspirations. Everyone has aspirations, Keith. Like, what the hell are you talking about? Again, Paul Mason seems to have invented a version of Keir Starmer in his head that doesn't exist. And of course, even on top of that, working class people are not a monolith. They're not a monolith who all like tough on crime policy, who want less immigration, whatever it might be. I think there's a bit of more of an age divide than a class divide on these ones. But it's just very funny to me for him to say, well, actually, maybe Jeremy Corbyn himself wasn't in touch with kind of a lot of other broad opinions, but the policies were there. And I don't really care about what the leader says or does. I just find it kind of ironic. He's just wrong about where the policy is. There is no economic radicalism. And he says, well, people want to become a liberal party. Yeah, you got the liberal party. You got the liberal party that all of these people that you're now deriding all originally wanted from the Blair right wing. You mad, Paul? Have you looked at the policy prospectus yet?
High growth, clean energy, safe streets, free healthcare, first-class education for your kids, and that's it. That I think is enough for voters to process right now because they're under such pressure and under such worry about their own economic circumstances. So I think we're about where I'd like us to be. I think that another thing saying to the people who, there were some left-wing people who supported Keir along with me, where we are has changed. The COVID epidemic put a huge dent in the public finances. We've then got Ukraine, a major war with a totalitarian dictatorship. We have to reprioritize. And one of the things I'm confident about is that Keir Starmer's government will lead a mission of national transformation, but it will do so around the priorities that matter now. And I just say to people leaving...
What transformation? Transforming into what? All of the same conservative policies? Or we can opt
very
in.
right wing, and I loved it.
But we can opt in to 0-hour contracts now. Oh, yeah, wow, great. Huge amounts of change here, Chair. I can just feel the change. Again, the main things people wanted to see from Labour were their workers' rights pledges and their green investment plans, and both of these things are starting to be watered down. Considerably so in the case of green investment, and the first trickles of U-turning are happening with the workers' rights pledges, Paul. He just literally is inventing a version of Keir Starmer in his head that does not fucking exist.
Not only are you losing your leverage, but the most important thing is, 110 years ago when Labour Party was founded, trade unionists worked out that, and I'm a lifelong trade unionist, if you want pressure on government, the best way to have that pressure for your workplace issues, for the issues around organisation and representation, is within a party that can be a government. It's all very well voting for the Greens. The Greens are not going to form a government. They may struggle to even get an MP, unfortunately for them. But if you want to share a voice and you are, say, a delivery rider or a railway worker today, that share of voice in government is only going to come through Keir Starmer's Labour Party.
Even then, the argument from us isn't whether or not the Greens are going to get into Parliament or not. Because I think a lot of people are taking the kind of Owen Jones line on this. I mean, I just said you should vote Green regardless because I think Labour are a party that don't deserve our support at all now. But even so, the utilitarian argument is, well, Labour are guaranteed to win the election. Labour are going to be the government, Paul. That's exactly why we are so disillusioned with the idea of whether our vote matters in this next election, because it won't matter. Labour are going to win, and it's going to be a very, very large majority. And so when we can't influence them internally, we have to influence them externally. Like, when he says, oh, well, no, Greens are never going to form a government, or UKIP were never going to form a government. They were never going to form a government. They barely even got an MP. They only got one because Douglas Carswell defected. But their role was to influence Conservative politics from the outside. It was to influence the anti-EU sentiment within the Conservative Party to be able to force them into having the referendum to stop the bleed of votes from the Conservative Party to UKIP. And it worked, and it got them Brexit. They didn't win any more than one MP, and they still got the political outcome that they desire. The whole point of having an alternative to Labour is by forcing them to change their position to fight for our votes, by imposing electoral consequences on them, either by winning seats off them, like we did in Brighton Pavilion in 2010 and like we're going to do in Bristol Central come the next election, but by also meaning that they lose votes to us that could cost them seats elsewhere. If the combined Green and Labour vote is more than the winning candidate from the Conservative Party, for example, in some swing seat, they know that their policy prospectus, which is just another centre-right economic policy platform, which wasn't going to win our vote, is what's cost them that seat. They are obsessed with the idea of what the swing voters in swing seats want. And I'm like, okay, well, now you're going to lose that seat because there's a large proportion of people who want to see the rich get taxed fairly, who want to see our economy become more fair and more pro-worker, and who also want to see our government not sell arms to a genocidal ethno-state hell-bent on the destruction of the Palestinian people. Like, it's very, very simple about why we do what we do.
Convinced by any of that, Matt Talcousin?
So I think it's a problem on multiple levels. I think all of the signs since Keir became leader have suggested that there is no intention for the type of economic radicalism that Paul's just gestured towards. I don't think that that's a credible reading of where the Labour Party is heading. I think that he himself has a credibility problem. I think that he is very not a strong leader. There's a perception that he gets pulled around a lot. Basically, what position he wants to take is sort of the expedient one.
He also didn't want to be leader, really and truly. Again, he was only an MP, so they could shoehorn him in as Ed Miliband's potential Attorney General if they won the election in 2015. And he was only becoming the leader because Labour Together approached him. They approached him and said, well, when all this Corbyn stuff goes down, we want you to be the leader. And he was like, okay, I guess I'll go with it. He's not a natural leader, as we've seen. And he's very happy to get pulled around on terms of policy because the policy is all being set by, Labour Together, by the Tony Blair Institute, by the Resolution Foundation, by people who are pulling the strings in the background.
I think without question, the Labour Party now has been captured to some degree by not the types of, interests that Paul's talking about, the trade unions and social movements. It's been captured by corporate and vested interests. And I think that if you look at a lot of the parliamentary candidate selections, if you look at a lot of the links that certain advisors have to certain lobbying firms, it's very, very clear the direction of travel that the Labour Party is going in. And I think it's not, and to say that a Labour government's going to deliver X, Y, Z, I just don't believe that that's the case. I don't believe that's what they want to do. I don't believe that's what they believe in. So they're absolutely free to do whatever they like if they win an election, and I'm sure that they will. But I don't believe it's the sort of things that the country needs. And I think in order to get them to do the things the country needs, you don't do that by just voting for them regardless. You have to take away you have to use your bargaining power. You have to use your leverage. And your leverage is, we're not going to vote for you if you don't do those things.
Paul,
And the important point as well is, I've said loads of times that outside of what's important for their vested interests, as Matt eloquently explained there, the other metric that matters to Keir Starmer and his leadership team is, will you vote for them or not? That is the single metric by which they set policy, because they have no broader social goals. As they have said many times, their one job is to get Labour into office. They say power because they don't actually care about the role of being in office. They care about being able to leverage their own power, but it's really being in office that they serve us, not the other way around. But outside of that, the main thing that matters to them is, will you vote for them or not? That is your single point of leverage. As soon as you say, I will vote for them regardless, to get the Tories out, instantly all of your leverage goes, they're not going to listen to a single word that you say. You're not a swing voter, and therefore you are not part of the conversation. So you have to use your leverage now. Everyone who says, oh, we need to stop criticising Labour until the manifesto's out, or we need to stop criticising Labour until they've won the election. Well, all of your leverage is gone. They've won the election, they've got everything they wanted from you. Everything they wanted from you is completely being ceded already. Our leverage is to ensure the manifesto is good. If the manifesto is bad because we've been letting them get away with it, we've been giving them a free pass for all of these months leading up to the election, it's we've written a manifesto that only appeals to swing voters in red wall seats. Yeah, all of our leverage is gone. It doesn't matter anymore. Well, the manifesto's there and it sucks. Well, we're not going to vote for you anyway. At least the leverage of saying, well, if your manifesto is good, then maybe we'll vote for you, rather than saying we're going to vote for you regardless of whether the manifesto sucks or not. Again, you've lost all of your leverage, and that's why these people who will just give Labour a carte blanche have essentially failed at the first hurdle in terms of how you exert pressure on a political party.
I'll come back on that.
Yeah, I think let's take Labour's Green Prosperity Plan. Okay, it is still, yes, slimmed down. It's the most radical green energy plan ever presented by a mainstream party. We're talking about a state-owned energy company. We're talking about £3 billion worth of money to be thrown at local energy projects, like the combined heat and power, trapping the heat that comes out of the London Underground, that kind of stuff. We are looking at...
First of all, a bunch of the things you've just said there are just a bunch of boondoggles. We're going to capture the heat out of the London Underground. Oh, okay, mate, sure. That's going to actually power huge amounts of anything. I mean, fine, do it. I'm not going to complain, but that's pretty small fry. And second of all, there is no state-owned energy company. GB Energy is an investment firm. It's an investment fund that they're going to use to put money into green energy projects. Sure, it's going to be better than subsidy because they're going to get 25% share ownership because they're expecting 3 times as much private investment as they're getting public investment. So that is going to be 25% share ownership, but they have no actual kind of shareholder control over the direction that any of these companies take in terms of their overall strategy, because they're minority rather than majority shareholders. And on top of that, all of the actual funding that's going into this has been massively scaled back because they literally U-turned. Again, he keeps talking about economic radicalism. It's all gone. It's been removed from the policy prospectus. It's just, he's living in fiction land.
An NHS workforce plan that will put, tens of thousands of extra NHS workers. We're talking about quadrupling offshore wind. We're talking about extra solar.
Again, you say that as if that's something that can be done with the current funding model, but on the NHS stuff that he just said there, first of all, the Conservatives have an NHS workforce plan. They're also doing that same thing. I'm glad that they're both doing it. It's a good thing they're both doing it. That's going to come from day-to-day spending, not fiscal expansion, part of retroactive fiscal rules. So they're going to have to find their own cash to do this under their own fiscal framework. And the one policy that they explicitly said was going to fund this, was going to fund their initial cash injection they've been talking about for the NHS for weeks now, was going to come from the non-dom tax status. And the non-dom tax status is the thing that they now can't do because the Conservatives have done it themselves. Again, he's just living in fantasy land. Total fiction.
Onshore wind, all of this stuff is what we need to achieve net zero. It's what we need to achieve social justice. And so the argument isn't, is Labour's programme radical enough? I can think of things I'd like them to do more on, for definite. But is this a party that's going to change the weather to empower working class people to seek their own social justice where they live, in their own community? And I believe it is. And fine, there are other parties have a right to form and campaign against us, but that's different from saying you don't want a Labour government or you want a small Labour government that's susceptible to all kinds of pressure from outside. It's not just the left, by the way. There's all kinds of pressures that will come on a Labour government in an era.
It's the one pressure that's really important. I know that people are going to have their own opinions on this, but I think one of the biggest things that the Labour government needs to get pressured on is electoral reform. Everybody talks about this. We're all sick of first past the post. And it's not within Labour's interest, not the party more generally, nor indeed the people on the right of the party who know the only reason they have leverage over the unions is because the unions know they have nowhere else to go because of first past the post. They will never get rid of it. The only way they can be pressured into changing it is by going into coalition with people who need it to happen and can use it as leverage. This was Femi's point in his video he made about Owen Jones, which I was actually pretty impressed with. When we watched it, I took some issues with it. I was impressed with the rationality that he spoke as being someone who's been kind of disillusioned with the Labour Party. We need electoral reform, and that's going to happen from outside the party. It's always bad that Labour have to listen to other people. I'm like, yeah, welcome to democracy. You can't just have dictatorial control because of an electoral system that favours you and your party.
A very tough geopolitical situation. Look at Gaza, you look at Ukraine. We need, I think Labour, you can read Labour like a stick of rock. You can see Starmer, what he stands for, what he's going to do. He cares about the environment.
He stands for nothing. He stands for literal nothing, Paul. He turns on a dime based upon who's pulling his strings at the time, based upon who has his ear, based upon what he thinks is politically astute for him to take. Completely cynically, the man's a total political, windstalk, a weather vane. This man is totally delusional, completely and utterly delusional. I mean, it's quite funny, really.
He cares about crime. Crime's a working class issue. We're going to sort that. I think that's what's resonating on doorsteps in the kind of places. Look, to be honest, in 2019, I went through what's called the Red Wall. I campaigned for Labour. It was the most depressing experience. I know from my colleagues and comrades in the Labour Party that right now on the doorstep in the north of England, in the Midlands, it's a much different experience because we've actually listened to people and turned their hopes and aspirations into a programme for government.
I mean, actually, the Midlands is the place where they're losing votes. I was looking at the poll numbers. I do a lot of looking into the internal poll numbers. Actually, the place in the country where Labour are doing the worst, outside of the southeast where they never do well, the southeast kind of counties around it rather than London itself. The place they're doing the least well in is the West Midlands, which is quite funny to me.
And Luke Akehurst, a final word from you. If left-wingers are listening to this and they're mulling over their futures in the Labour Party and they're listening to Matt's old cousin and Paul Mason, who is right about how happy a home the Labour Party under Keir Starmer can be to people who are supporters of Jeremy Corbyn? Or is it, as Simon Fletcher said, a political dead end?
Well, I don't think it's the job of a political party to make its members happy. It's a job of a political party is to be to deliver the policy changes that the ordinary people that back it need, and to be popular enough to get into power. To do that, I've certainly not been involved in the Labour Party because I wanted to be. I wanted it to make me happy. I think if you identify with the values.
So it is a dead end then. So you're agreeing that it's a dead end. You just think that it's a good thing, which is fine. You can think that it's a good thing all you want, but at least you are tacitly admitting here you think that it's a good thing that there is a dead end for anybody who wants left-wing policy. Again, because you fundamentally, not true, but you do believe that their opinions aren't shared by the broader population, at least on macro policy, which is, again, what I actually care about. Change our tough on crime policy. You can change policy on immigration. I might disagree with you, but I don't really care broadly outside of macro policy.
To the Labour Party, which are unchanging over 100 years. They're about social justice and about working people getting a fair share of the cake, and about rights in the workplace and everything else.
Are they going to get
then
a fair share of the cake if we don't tax the rich, though? Is it the working people getting a fair share of the cake if we keep capital gains tax and dividends taxation lower than income tax? Then even like people who work and earn a lot of money are getting taxed at a higher rate than those who literally just make money off of owning rather than working. So your own prospectus isn't even represented of those values that you claim to hold. And on top of that, you talk about all the broader public support. Do you think the broader public supported the Vietnam War, Luke? On a postcard?
You should be in the large political party that has the possibility of taking the responsibility of being in government and actually doing something about all of those things. It's really easy to be incredibly happy and be off in the Greens or a fringe left party, and your conscience to be completely clear because you never make any compromise with reality or with what voters think. But what does that achieve in politics? Politics is about getting into power and changing things. And if you want to be part of that, being the Labour Party, sure, there might be moments of a bit of disappointment, or you don't get 100% of what you want. But actually being there in government, changing things is the key thing. It's about whether your mentality of getting into politics is about doing things or protesting about things that other people do.
Well,
Yeah,
Matt's
it's all about this, politics of power, not politics of protest shit. They talk about every single time. When first of all, the idea that just having policies that broad swathes of the public agree with is somehow protest. These policies that got over 40% of the vote in 2017, although we forget 2017, that never happened. That never happened in 2017. Again, based on what I was talking about in response to Paul Mason earlier in terms of the policy being supported and a lot of kind of compromises that were made. And he says, oh, well, you can't just get everything that you want. I'm like, well, I'm getting nothing that I want. I'm getting nothing that I want currently. So I'm looking elsewhere. And on top of me getting nothing that I want, they also tell me they're not the party that I should be in. In the words of Keir Starmer, the door is open that you can leave. Yeah, I've left. I've joined another party who is happily accepting, that's happily democratic, and has at least some plan to deliver on the social justice goals that you claim to support, except don't want to actually happen in terms of policy, Luke. Hey there, if you enjoyed the video, make sure that you like and leave a comment. That helps the video out in the algorithm. If you subscribe and ring the bell, it'll let you know when I go live. I stream every day on YouTube and Twitch. You can also follow all of my socials down in the description. And if you want to support me in a more financial manner, there's a join button for membership to just 99p to be a member on YouTube, as well as a Patreon, and there's some merch there as well. And hopefully I'll catch you on the next video. Take care.